Peppa Pig, Peppa's Storybook Collection. The Story of Peppa Pig. Once upon a time there was a lovable, slightly bossy little piggy named Peppa. More than anything in the whole wide world, Peppa loved jumping up and down in muddy puddles. Mummy Pig was Peppa's mommy. She was very wise about most things. Mummy Pig would say, "Peppa, when you jump in muddy puddles, you must wear your boots." Daddy Pig was Peppa's daddy. He loved eating cookies and he had a big round tummy. When Daddy Pig jumped in muddy puddles, he made a very big muddy splash. When Peppa's little brother George was born, Peppa helped look after him. And as soon as George was old enough, Peppa taught him how to jump in muddy puddles. "George," Peppa said, just like Mummy Pig, "if you jump in muddy puddles, you must wear your boots." George liked muddy puddles, but he liked his toy Mr. Dinosaur more. Even though George could not speak yet, he could say one word very well: dinosaur. Grrr. Sometimes Peppa got a little bit annoyed with George. "George," she would sigh, "why do you always say dinosaur for everything? It's so boring." One day Peppa, George, Mummy and Daddy Pig got into their little car and drove to their new house on top of a little green hill. Peppa was excited about the new house, but she was very excited about the very wet and extremely muddy puddles in the yard. "Beep beep. Can we go and jump in the muddy puddles?" asked Peppa. "It's nearly time for bed, Peppa," replied Mummy. "You will have to wait until tomorrow." Peppa and George woke up very early the next morning and went to find Mummy and Daddy Pig. "Can we please go outside and jump in muddy puddles?" asked Peppa excitedly. "We are going to Granny and Grandpa Pig's house today, Peppa," replied Mummy Pig sleepily. "You can jump in muddy puddles there." After breakfast, it was time to leave. So Peppa and her family jumped into their little car. "Ready?" asked Daddy Pig cheerily. "Yes, Daddy Pig," everyone answered back. "Then let's go," shouted Daddy Pig. "Yippee!" cried Peppa. She couldn't wait to get to Granny and Grandpa Pig's house and jump in muddy puddles. The family soon arrived at Granny and Grandpa's house. Peppa and George were very excited. They loved going to visit Granny and Grandpa Pig. "Granny Pig, Grandpa Pig," cried Peppa. "Gangy, Baba Pig," shouted George. "Hello, my little ones," answered Granny Pig. "Come inside." "Granny," said Peppa, "can I jump in muddy puddles, please?" "I think Grandpa Pig has something to show you first, Peppa," said Granny Pig. Peppa was a little disappointed. She really wanted to jump in muddy puddles. Grandpa Pig took Peppa and George to his vegetable garden. "This is where I grow my vegetables," said Grandpa Pig. "First, I plant some seeds." "Can we eat your yummy vegetables, Grandpa?" asked Peppa, forgetting all about muddy puddles. "We have to wait for them to grow a bit bigger," replied Grandpa. "Ooh!" gasped Peppa excitedly. Suddenly there was a loud bang. Oh dear, gasped Grandpa Pig. That was thunder. That means it's going to rain. We should hurry inside before we get wet. Peppa, George, and Grandpa Pig ran inside as fast as they could to get out of the rain. Peppa and George watched the rain splish, splash, splosh down the window. George started to cry. "Don't cry, George," said Peppa. "It's only rain." "Dinosaur!" But George wasn't crying because it was raining. George was crying because he had lost Mr. Dinosaur. Peppa searched upstairs, downstairs, and even in the toilet. But she couldn't find Mr. Dinosaur anywhere. Just then she had an idea. Peppa ran outside and found a very wet Mr. Dinosaur in Grandpa's very muddy vegetable garden. She ran inside and gave Mr. Dinosaur to George. George was very happy. "Dinosaur! Grrr! The rain has stopped," cried Peppa. "What can we do now?" "I have a very good idea, Peppa," said Daddy Pig, pointing outside. "Hooray!" cheered Peppa, seeing the muddiest puddles ever. Peppa had been so busy looking at Grandpa's vegetables and searching for Mr. Dinosaur, she had forgotten all about jumping in puddles. Peppa loved jumping up and down in muddy puddles more than anything in the whole wide world. All of Peppa's family loved jumping up and down in muddy puddles more than anything in the whole wide world. Best friends. Once upon a time, Peppa's best friend Susie Sheep came to play. "I have something to show you," said Susie. Susie held up a photograph of a baby sheep. "Look, it's me," said Susie. "You are not a baby, Susie," said Peppa, shaking her head. "This is an old photo," Susie explained. "It was taken when I was a baby." Peppa snorted. She didn't remember Susie being a baby. That was just silly. Susie pointed at Peppa. "In the olden days, you were a baby too," she said. "I don't remember being a baby," said Peppa. "But you were," insisted Susie. "Ask your mummy." Peppa and Susie raced inside. Mummy Pig was working on the computer. "Mummy," cried Peppa, "Susie is making up stories." "No, I'm not," Susie said. Peppa told Mummy Pig about Susie's silly idea. "I don't remember being a baby," Peppa insisted. "But you were a baby, Peppa," said Mummy Pig. Mummy Pig pulled up a picture of a baby pig on the computer. "Who do you think this is, Peppa?" she asked. Peppa thought that the baby looked like her cousin, Baby Alexander. "Is it Baby Alexander?" she asked. "No," replied Mummy Pig. "That's you as a baby, Peppa." Peppa was surprised. She had been a baby. Peppa and Susie giggled. Baby Peppa looked very cute. George and Daddy Pig came in to see what all the fuss was about. "Look, Daddy," said Peppa. "That's me as a baby." "I remember it," said Daddy Pig. "That photo was taken on our first day in this house." "What do you mean?" asked Peppa. Daddy Pig told Peppa, Susie, and George that they had moved into their house when Peppa was very little. "We brought all our things on the top of our car," he said. "Mummy Pig put up some pictures," said Daddy Pig. "Daddy Pig put up a shelf," said Mummy Pig. "And Grandpa Pig made us a lovely flower garden." Peppa and Susie went outside. There was no flower garden at this house. "Why don't we have a flower garden now?" Peppa asked. "We used to, but Daddy Pig looked after it." Mummy Pig sighed. Said Daddy Pig, embarrassed. "We had the wrong kind of soil for flowers." "Was Susie my friend in the olden days?" asked Peppa. Daddy Pig nodded. "Of course," he said. "You and Susie have always been best friends." Peppa wondered what games she played with Susie when they were little. "Did we jump up and down in muddy puddles?" she asked. "No," Mummy Pig laughed. "You were babies. You couldn't even walk yet." "What did we do when we were babies?" asked Susie. "You cried, you burped, and you laughed," said Mummy Pig. Susie and Peppa giggled. It must have been so silly being babies. "Baby Peppa, baby Susie." "Then you grew into toddlers," continued Mummy Pig, "and you played together all the time." "But where was George?" Peppa asked. "He was a baby in my tummy," said Mummy Pig. Peppa thought for a moment. Daddy Pig's tummy was even bigger than Mummy's. "Is there a baby in there?" she asked. "No, Peppa," chuckled Daddy Pig. "This tummy is pure muscle." Soon George was born, Mummy Pig said, and Granny and Grandpa Pig brought him a very special present. Can you guess what it was, Peppa? Peppa knew just what present it must have been. "Mr. Dinosaur!" she cried. "Goo goo, grrr." Daddy Pig said that little Peppa and Susie liked to do everything together. They liked to jump, hee hee hee, dance, la la la, and run around all over the place. Then one day, said Mummy Pig, "You saw something amazing. A muddy puddle. You loved jumping up and down in muddy puddles together," said Mummy Pig. Peppa, George and Susie all ran outside. "I still love muddy puddles," cried Peppa. "Me too," cried Susie. Peppa, George and Susie looked for the biggest muddy puddle they could find and jumped right in. Daddy Pig brought his camera. "Let's take a photo of you, Susie and George now, Peppa," he said. "Yes," exclaimed Peppa, "because Susie and I were best friends in the olden days. And we are still best friends now." Click. Little or big, Peppa and Susie will always be best friends. And they will always love jumping up and down in muddy puddles. Peppa Pig, George catches a cold. Mummy Pig says Peppa and George can play in the rain, but they must wear rain clothes to keep dry. But George hates wearing his rain hat, so he has thrown it in a muddy puddle. Peppa knows that is not a good idea. Come inside, children, calls Daddy Pig. It's raining too hard now. Where is your hat, George? Asks Mummy Pig. Achoo! Replies George. Oh dear, George has caught a cold. Achoo! George cannot stop sneezing. Poor little George, says Mummy Pig. You don't look very well. Don't worry, I will call Dr. Brown Bear, says Daddy Pig. Will George go to the hospital? Asks Peppa. No, George has to go to bed, replies Daddy. So George is not truly sick then? Says Peppa, disappointed. George, you have to stay in bed until you are better, says Daddy Pig. Why? Asks George. Because you have to keep warm, says Daddy. Dr. Brown Bear is here to see George. Open wide and say ah, he says. George is a little afraid of Dr. Brown Bear. He hides under his sheets with Mr. Dinosaur. Dr. Brown Bear asks Peppa to show George that he does not have to be scared. Ah, says Peppa. George laughs and comes out from under his sheets. He opens his mouth so Dr. Brown Bear can look. Ah, says George. George has caught a cold. Dr. Brown Bear tells Mummy Pig he can have some warm milk at bedtime to help him sleep. Thank you, Dr. Brown Bear, says Mummy Pig. You are welcome. Goodbye, says Dr. Brown Bear before driving off in his special white car. The next morning, George wakes up early. The warm milk made him sleep very well. Roar! Cries George, waking up Peppa. He is feeling much better. It's a lovely sunny day, but George is wearing his rain hat. He doesn't want to catch another cold. Oh, George, you don't need to wear your hat when it is warm and sunny, Mummy Pig tells him. Everyone laughs. George never goes in the rain without his hat again. Princess Peppa. It is bedtime for Peppa and George. Mummy Pig tucks them in and turns out the light. Good night, little piggies, she whispers. Downstairs, Granny and Grandpa Pig arrive to have dinner with Mummy and Daddy Pig. They all sit down to eat, but suddenly they hear noises coming from upstairs. Is that Peppa and George? Asks Grandpa Pig. Looks like the little piggies aren't sleeping after all. Mummy Pig goes upstairs to check on Peppa and George. They are wide awake. Peppa, George, quickly now, hop into bed, says Mummy Pig. You are making lots of noise and it's too late for you to be up. We aren't sleepy yet, says Peppa. Will you tell us a story? Asks Peppa. We promised to go to sleep after a story. All right, says Mummy Pig. Once upon a time there was a princess. Peppa jumps in. Oh yes, says Mummy Pig. Once upon a time there was a courageous princess named Peppa. She lived in a castle with Sir George, the brave knight. And the princess and the knight had a cook who made the most delicious food ever, adds Peppa. Of course, says Mummy Pig. She made cupcakes and cookies and a cherry jelly tower, says Peppa. That was the princess's favorite food. The princess and the knight invited their friend Pedro Pony, and they all ate the yummy desserts. Yes, says Mummy Pig, and afterward everyone was so full they fell right asleep. The end. Then they woke up, cries Peppa, and they invited a wizard to the castle. A wizard? Asks Mummy Pig. Yes, says Peppa, and he did a big magic show. But then, all of a sudden, a big green dragon came to the castle. Peppa continues. He he he, laughs George. Grrr. Oh no, says Mummy Pig. How scary. The dragon wasn't scary, says Peppa. He was just very hungry. So the king came and ordered the cook to make a picnic, says Peppa. He did? Mummy Pig asks with a yawn. Yes, says Peppa. The cook, the wizard, the princess, the knight, the king, Pedro Pony and the dragon sat down to a big feast. And then they went to sleep, murmurs Mummy Pig, as her head droops to one side. No, says Peppa. Then they had a party. The princess arrived to the party in a beautiful carriage, says Peppa. She came with her friend Susie Sheep. Sir George pulled the carriage with his horse. All of their friends came to the castle to dance. There was Rebecca Rabbit and Pedro Pony and Danny Dog. Downstairs, Daddy Pig, Granny Pig and Grandpa Pig are wondering what is taking Mummy Pig so long. Maybe we should see what's going on upstairs, says Daddy Pig. I think I hear a snoring, says Granny Pig. Mummy Pig must have finally gotten Peppa and George to fall asleep. But Peppa and George are not snoring. Mummy Pig is. It looks like Princess Peppa is the best at telling bedtime stories, says Daddy Pig. Peppa Pig, George's new dinosaur. George's favorite toy is Mr. Dinosaur. George likes bouncing Mr. Dinosaur in the garden, playing with him at bath time, and cuddling with him when he goes to sleep. At bedtime, Peppa says, George, I think Mr. Dinosaur is broken. George is very upset. Mummy and Daddy Pig come in to see why George is crying. Poor George, says Daddy Pig. Maybe it's time you got a new dinosaur. The next day, Peppa, George, Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig visit Mr. Fox's shop. I'm sure we will find a lovely dinosaur here, George, says Mummy Pig. Look, George, says Daddy Pig, pointing to the shop window. There is a big one. Ooh, dinosaur, says George. Good morning, says Mr. Fox. Can I help you? We would like to buy the dinosaur in the window, please, says Daddy Pig. Good choice, says Mr. Fox. This is Dino Roar. He walks, he talks, and he sings. Dino Roar, says George. We will take it, says Daddy Pig. George is playing with Dino Roar in the garden. Dino Roar sings, Dino Roar, listen to Dino Roar. Roar! Careful, George, says Daddy Pig. Don't play too roughly because Dino Roar will break. George wants to play with Dino Roar in the bath. Dino Roar, says George. Mummy Pig says, George, if you get Dino Roar wet, he will stop working. Peppa and George are asleep in bed, but suddenly Dino Roar comes to life. Listen to Dino Roar, roar! George, says Peppa, Dino Roar has woken me up. Maybe Dino Roar should sleep somewhere else, says Daddy Pig, taking Dino Roar away. George is feeling sad. He cannot play with Dino Roar in the garden or the bath or even in bed. Don't worry, George, says Mummy Pig brightly. Dino Roar can still roar. Dino Roar, listen to Dino Roar. Dino Roar stops walking and talking completely. I think the batteries must have run out, says Mummy Pig. Already? How many are there? Grumbles Daddy Pig as batteries pour out of Dino Roar. Hundreds and thousands, cries Peppa. Suddenly, Peppa spots something green under a bush. What's this? Says Peppa. Is it a trumpet? You have found Mr. Dinosaur's tail, says Mummy Pig. Now Daddy Pig can fix him. He might be a bit difficult to fix, says Daddy Pig doubtfully. But the tail slips perfectly into place. Ho ho ho, chuckles Daddy Pig. Hello, Mr. Dinosaur, says Peppa. Dinosaur, says George. George is so happy to have his favorite toy back. Grrr. Peppa Pig, Peppa's first sleepover. Peppa is going to her very first sleepover at Zoe Zebra's house. Welcome to my sleepover, Zoe says. I will pick you up in the morning, Mummy Pig says to Peppa with a kiss. Rebecca Rabbit, Susie Sheep and Emily Elephant are already here. I have got my teddy, Peppa says. Zoe has her monkey, Rebecca has her carrot, Susie has her owl and Emily has her frog. Don't stay up too late, girls, and don't be too loud. Daddy Zebra has to get up early to deliver the post, Mummy Zebra says as she turns out the lights. Zoe's baby twin sisters, Zuzu and Zaza, want to join the sleepover too. Sleepovers are only for big girls, Zoe says. The twins begin to cry. They are so sweet and little, Peppa says. Can they stay? Rebecca asks. Okay, Zoe says to the twins, but you must not fall asleep. What should we do first? Susie asks. I am having piano lessons. Listen. Zoe starts to pound on the keys. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Mummy Zebra has woken up. Shh! You must be quiet so Daddy Zebra can sleep. Now into your sleeping bags, please. What do we do now? Peppa asks. At sleepovers there is always a midnight feast. Zoe says. It's when we eat things, Susie says in a hushed voice, in secret. Shh! Zoe says as she leads the girls to the kitchen. They each grab some delicious fruit, perfect for a midnight feast. The floorboard creaks. Oh no, Mommy Zebra has woken up. You will wake Daddy Zebra. Now who knows a bedtime story? The girls take turns. Once upon a time there was a little fairy. Susie begins. And she lived in the forest. Peppa continues. And the fairy met a big monster who went roar. Emily says with a big elephant trumpet noise. Oh dear, the noise has woken Daddy Zebra. Sorry, Daddy. Zoe says, there was a story about a fairy and a scary monster. And we want to know what happens next. Peppa says, very well. Daddy Zebra sighs. The monster lifted up his great big hairy paws and walked along on his great big hairy feet and sang, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Daddy Zebra sings gently as he plays the piano. Daddy Zebra's song has sent everyone to sleep. Peppa Pig, Peppa's Storybook Collection. Playtime for Peppa and George. This is Peppa and George. Peppa is George's big sister. They share a bedroom and lots of toys. Peppa and George love being brother and sister. They play fun games together every day. One day, Peppa and George are with Mummy and Daddy Pig in the living room. Mummy Pig has to work on her computer and Daddy Pig wants to work in the garden. Peppa, George, why don't you two play a game? Asks Daddy Pig. Oh goody, says Peppa. George and I love to play games. George likes that idea too. It is a lovely sunny day, so Peppa and George run outside. George, let's jump up and down in muddy puddles, shouts Peppa. But George does not want to jump in muddy puddles today. He would like to play a different game. Okay, says Peppa, we can play catch instead. Peppa tosses a ball to George, but George does not want to play catch either. George, what would you like to play? Asks Peppa. Oink, oink. George has an idea for a new game. Peppa follows George to Mummy and Daddy Pig's bedroom. There is nothing fun to play in here, says Peppa. George shows Peppa a box at the end of the bed. What's this? Asks Peppa. Wow, says Peppa. George, do you want to dress up and pretend to be Mummy and Daddy? Oink, oink. George does want to dress up. Good idea, says Peppa. I want to play that game too. Peppa helps George put on Daddy Pig's black hat, coat and shoes. Now you must pretend to be exactly like Daddy Pig, she says. George thinks for a moment. He makes a loud noise, just like Daddy Pig. Very good, George, says Peppa. Now it's my turn. Peppa puts on Mummy Pig's fancy dress and hat. Then she puts on the high-heeled shoes. Suddenly Peppa is very tall. They giggle. Dressing up is very silly. George, what else do I need to look exactly like Mummy? Peppa asks. George does not know. Peppa goes over to Mummy Pig's dresser. Sometimes Peppa watches Mummy Pig sit in front of the mirror and get ready to go out with Daddy Pig. I need makeup, of course, she says. First, some powder. Peppa pats the pink powder on her cheeks. Puff, puff, puff. Lovely. Now for some lipstick. Peppa draws on a smile using Mummy's shiny red lipstick. How do I look? George thinks Peppa makes a very pretty Mummy Pig. Come along, Daddy Pig, says Peppa. It's time to go to work. Peppa and George walk downstairs. They find the real Mummy Pig working on her computer. Hello, Peppa. Hello, George, says Mummy Pig. I beg your pardon, says Peppa. I'm not Peppa. I am Mummy Pig, and this is Daddy Pig. Oh, I see, says Mummy Pig. Hello, Mummy Pig. Hello, Daddy Pig. George, Peppa whispers, remember to act exactly like Daddy, says George. Excuse me, says Peppa. I have a lot of work to do. She picks up Mummy Pig's telephone. Hello, yes, do this, do that. Thank you. Then Peppa taps on the computer keyboard. Tap, tap, tap. Peppa is very good at pretending to be Mummy Pig. All right, goodbye, she says, hanging up the phone. And done. Come on, Daddy Pig, it's time you did some work too. Peppa and George go back outside. They find Daddy Pig digging a hole in the garden. Hello, Peppa and George, says Daddy Pig. I'm not Peppa, I am Mummy Pig, and this is Daddy Pig, says Peppa. Oh, I see, says Daddy Pig. What are you up to today? We are here to do some work, declares Peppa. George jumps into the hole and begins to dig. He is having fun pretending to work like Daddy Pig. Peppa jumps into the hole to help George dig. Suddenly, they hear Mummy Pig calling from the house. Peppa, George. Mummy Pig has brought ice cream for everyone. You must take off those muddy clothes before you eat, Peppa and George, she says. I am Mummy Pig and this is Daddy Pig, Peppa insists. Are you sure? Asks Mummy Pig. That's a shame because I have Peppa and George's favorite ice cream flavors. But if we can't find them... Peppa and George quickly take off the muddy clothes. Here we are, shouts Peppa. We were only pretending to be you and Daddy. Ho ho, you really had us fooled, says Daddy Pig. It was George's idea to dress up, says Peppa. Oink! George nods, licking his ice cream. You both did a very good job, says Mummy Pig. Peppa and George love ice cream and they love pretending to be Mummy and Daddy Pig. But most of all, they love being brother and sister.